Hey guys, welcome back to another 3D printing review. And today we're going to be checking out the MINGDA Rock 3. So in this video we're going to unbox it, set it up, and do some prints. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so this is the box that the Rock 3 comes in, and it is quite large. These are the dimensions, 660, 510 by 260 millimeters. And the shipping label does say 29 pounds, so it's a decent sized box. And also there is a picture here of what the printer looks like. Alright, so let's go ahead and open it up. So we do have the white soft foam. There's a nice thick layer on top. And this is everything we see inside. And the first thing that's catching my eye is this hot end assembly here. I can't really pull it out, but it does look quite unique. I'll take a closer look at it a little bit later. But yeah, everything seems to be packed very well. Looks like we have some instructions and other things here. So here we have a big sheet of paper that says do not remove before finishing assembly. I'm not sure exactly what this means, but maybe this is supposed to go on the bed. But we do get a flexible magnetic build platform, and it's huge, as you guys can see. It looks like to be the 300 by 300 size, maybe even bigger. But I find these to work very well, and I'm definitely happy to see it here, especially for this large printing size. So here we have a little baggie of parts, looks like. All of our hardware, tools, and things like that. We'll go through that in a second. Piece of the spool holder, and it is all metal. So it appears to be that the printer is pretty much pre-built or pre-assembled, and mostly we just have to put the major parts together. So the gantry is on the top here, and that came out pretty easy. But the good part is that we have the dual Z-axis motors with the lead screws on each side. So this is going to give us a lot more stability. Now, even though this is a pretty big plus, especially for this size printer, the sort of negative part about it is that there's no tether between the two leads. And normally I'd definitely like to see that being tethered with a belt in between. But interestingly enough, some of these printers actually do quite well, not throwing off their balance between the two, as long as you don't push on one side of it. So we'll see how this printer does. But overall, it all seems pretty well built here. Alright, so here's our hot end, and it looks like it is tethered to the base, and we have like a junction box here also with some wiring. But if we take a closer look here at the hot end, it's definitely quite unique. It's kind of a open design. What makes it kind of cool is that it is a direct drive extruder. And what's even more special is that this extruder is a dual gear extruder, so it pushes on both sides of the filament. And I think this is the main advantage here with this printer, is that you get direct drive, and plus you get the dual gear extruder right there close to the hot end. So this should give us really nice, accurate printing with great retraction speed since we're so close to the hot end. And by the way, this extruder does look like one of those Bondtech style extruders. But on the heat break here, we can see that it's round, and we got a little small fan. Just kind of clips around the heat break, and that's how it holds itself. So it does kind of move around in there, which hopefully it won't make a racket as it lives on there. There's also, looks like an LED here. I'm gonna have some lighting. The heat block is kind of small, but should be sufficient, and it's not insulated. And then we have an axial cooling fan here with a 3D printed duct. So overall, it looks pretty good. It is exposed somewhat here and there, but I guess what's going to really matter is how it performs, and we'll see how it does. I think this is the big thing about the Rock 3 here, is this assembly. So we got lots of more foam. Looks like our power cable, and here at the very bottom we can see the base, and the hot end assembly is connected to it, so we're going to have to be a little careful here pulling it out. And definitely got a good weight to it too. And as you guys can see here, we have a really large, huge bed, and it is 320 by 320 and can print 400 millimeters tall. So this is definitely a large format printer. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out of the way. Now we're going to check out all the details here in a second. But as far as the packing goes, everything is packed very well. So that's everything for the box. All right, so I got the base upside down, and the reason it's upside down because I want to take this cover off so we can see how everything is laid out inside and the electronics. So there are nice little squishy feet, 4 of them on each corner. So it appears that we're going to need a Phillips screwdriver. Now I'm not sure if that's included in here, but let's go ahead and see what is in this bag. So it looks like we have some brackets, a set of Allen wrenches, an open-ended wrench. Looks like part of the spool holder was in there, an extra PTFE tubing, some more brackets here, a USB cable to connect from the printer to the computer, a little baggie of bolts, and a full-size SD card, which is 4 gigs. Well, it looks like we do have one more thing in here, and it's an extra little nozzle, which appears to be 0.4 millimeters. So one thing to note is that if you don't have a full-size SD card reader, it does not come with one. But then again, you can always use the USB cable to connect to the printer. So it looks like there's 10 little bolts going all the way around, and I'm going to go ahead and take them all out. All right, so now the cover should just pop right off, and sure enough it does. And this is what we see inside. So let's go ahead and take a closer look, and I'm sorry if there's a little bit of shaking. I don't have any stabilization on this camera. But looking here on the motherboard, we can see we have an ARM processor. We have synced stepper motors, but they are not removable. Nice to see that they have little heat sinks on them. This is the model of the board, MINGD 301. So out of the board, we have a ribbon cable that goes to the touchscreen LCD, and that's what it looks like from the back. So going to the power supply, it looks pretty generic. We have the voltage selection, which is already set to 110 on mine. All the connectors are nicely connected and crimped. So this is a larger power supply, 480 watts, which is 20 amps at 24 volts. Our Y stepper motor and our power socket next to that. So yeah, we're all very well put together. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the lid back on. We'll flip it around and start the assembly. All right, so we got the base back on its feet. So the next thing we're gonna need to do, pull these little foams out of it, if you haven't already. And so what we want to do next is check, make sure our bed is riding nicely on the rails here. So I don't have any kind of slop in mine, so it seems to be tight, but I want to still check to see, make sure it's not too tight. So you're going to see some rollers here on the sides, and mine are a little bit tight, to be honest. Let's check the other side, and these are too loose here. So yeah, it's definitely not adjusted correctly at the moment. So even though it doesn't wobble, there are a total of 6 rollers, and one of them is completely loose, doesn't do anything. That needs to be adjusted for sure. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the super tight ones. Like this one actually feels fine, and this one is just loose. Grab the included wrench here, and there's eccentric nuts that you can spin on all of the outside 4 rollers. And so we're just going to adjust that until it gets tighter. And what you want is just enough friction where you can still spin the roller with your hand, and there's like pretty decent amount of friction. So if you have it too tight, it'll wear out the rollers really quick, and if it's too loose, it'll wobble. So these are about right on both sides here. So let's flip it around, and now we'll loosen these because these are too tight where I can't almost spin them at all, at least one of them. I think this one here might be okay, but this one is way too tight. So we're gonna loosen this one up a bit until we get just a perfect drag where we can spin it pretty easily. All right, so now both of them are spinning easily. Now we're gonna check the other side at the same time also. Make sure all 4 of them are perfect and adjusting them if needed. So it looks like mine are perfect right there. And you're not gonna have any wobble still on the bed, but you're gonna have a very smooth motion. Also, as you're checking that, go ahead and check your belt here on the Y-axis. Make sure it's running true on the pulleys and that it is tight enough. So on mine, everything seems just fine and tight. So we'll leave it the way it is. All right, so let's go ahead and grab the manual. Well, I guess there's a few things here, but we have a little readme here about the hazards of using a 3D printer and a little quality control list here of everything that was included. After sales card with some QR codes. And we have 2 booklets here. One is for the installation, and the other one's actually for using the software, which is kind of cool. Because if you're unfamiliar with slicing models and, printing them, this could probably help you out a bit. Well, let's go ahead and open up this installation manual. So it's not a book, it's actually like a little brochure, I guess, that opens up. And it looks like a total of 9 steps, going with step 1 over here, putting the main gantry, the upper portion of the printer, to the base. So we are gonna need some bolts. They're gonna be in this baggie here. And they are the short ones, but the larger of the bunch. and there should be 4 of them total. So it's quite simple how this goes together. So the gantry is literally going to just sit here right on top of the base, and there's a couple of holes here that will line up with the channel on the bottom. So there's threads here in the channel. So with the motors going to the back, so there is a little indentation that it falls into, so it does line up quite easily. And then we're simply just going to grab a bolt and run it through. There's a couple of holes underneath into the channel. So we'll grab our large Allen wrench. And the best way to do this is either lean the printer up, which might be a little bit of a challenge, but because this one grooves in here, kind of, it holds it, it should be quite simple. But using this little spool holder that was included, we can use it to prop the printer. I'm just gonna raise one side carefully. I'm just gonna put it under one of the feet here, and it's gonna hold it. So now I can go underneath and start the first bolt. So you can just go off of the edge of the table or whatever is easier, but we're gonna just start the 2 bolts here on this side, and you don't want to tighten that. And the reason for that is because we still have to start the other side, and we want to make sure everything is loose where it can move around. So we're just going to start them and then go to the other side. So same thing here. So yeah, we're just simply connecting the gantry to the base with the 4 main bolts. So we can go ahead and tighten these up pretty good. So now I'm going to go to the other side and go ahead and tighten this side. All right, so that wasn't very hard. So on the manual, it takes us all to a whole different place, but I want to go ahead and move to step 5 first, since we're over here working on connecting the gantry to the base because it's part of this. So there are 2 brackets that install here. There's a T here and another L bracket here. So we have a baggie of the T brackets. So there's just 2 aluminum little brackets, and they literally go right here with some bolts that go straight to the base and the channel, and they're threaded. Now the L brackets are a little bit different, is because one side has just a bolt going through it to the base, and the other side actually uses a T-nut with a bolt. I guess the flat spot goes to the inside like this. So our bolt with the T-nut will need to go here on one of the tops. They are symmetrical, so it doesn't really matter which side's up or down, but yeah, so we're just gonna put a bolt through one end and then grab a T-nut, start it on the bolt. Hopefully you can see there a little better, but yeah. So literally the T-nut is gonna go into the channel like that. And then we're just gonna grab a random bolt from the pack of bolts that it came with. So the ones on the bottom are actually these larger ones, and the one with the T-nut is the smaller ones. Start tightening up, and then the T-nut will turn inside the channel and lock itself in. So once you get that pretty good, then we can go ahead and tighten the bottom one. And that's it, and our bracket is on, and that gives us a lot more rigidity. Now for the T bracket, we got the same situation here. We're just gonna tighten it here. So the longer bolts are gonna go on the top, and the shorter ones are to the bottom. There's 4 total. Well, yeah, simple as that. Our T is on, and I'm really happy to see that MINGDA went this route and used the extra brackets on both ends, because most printers have this issue where, especially on the larger formats, where it's too heavy on the top because of the spool up there, and you get some vibrations back and forth. But with all this bracing, we should have very solid gantry and very minimal flex. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side with the other 2 brackets. All right, so the other side's done. The only difference here is I had some wires that had to go around, but there's cutouts on this bracket that they go around in, so pretty straightforward. All right, so now that we're done with that, let's go ahead and move to step 2, which is installing this junction box right over here on this X-axis motor section. So the junction box itself has some wires here that we're gonna have to plug in, looks like. The more important ones are for this X-axis switch here, the limit switch. And there's 2 little prongs that come out of it, and it doesn't really matter which one you plug them into. It's just a kind of like a short circuit, so as long as you plug them in, that's all that matters. And it looks like the other wires for the X-axis motor is just gonna go kind of down to the side. But yeah, with the QR code right side up, we're gonna line it up here. There's 2 bolts, one here and one down here, the 2 little tabs that the bolts go through. And it's these little Phillips ones. But you guys can see there's one on the bottom and then one here on the top. So when you're putting this in, just make sure your main wire here that goes down to the base is not twisted in a funny way. And this little wire here comes out of this corner from the back, and it's going to plug into the motor here. So for step 3, we'll be installing the hot end assembly to the X-axis carriage. So this piece to here, and we're going to look at it from the back, because if you guys can see here, there's 3 little holes there, and this hot end is going to line up. So make sure your cable's not twisted in any funny way. Move the hot end where it needs to go. But you can see this bracket here on the hot end simply just sit and line up, or those 3 little holes there, and the threads are on this side. And these are the last 3 bolts that are left, or I think they're the last ones. Bring some light in here so you guys can see, but we have 1 end on the bottom. Start 2 more. All right, so we got all 3 of them in. I'm gonna snug them up real good, and we'll be done with this step. All right, so that looks good right there. So for the next part, we got step 4, which is installing the spool holder. And it's these 2 pieces here. So we're gonna take this bolt out, line it up. So this part is easy enough. And then on the bottom here, we have 2 holes, which we got 2 little bolts, lock washers, or I guess lock nuts is what I meant to say. Yeah, just like that. And then we're gonna go here to the top of the printer, and our, well, you guys can't really see it, but our filament detector feed in is right here. But we're gonna line up this thing pointing to the front like this. So we're looking at the back right now. So you wanna put it offset to the sensor here. We'll take a look at it here in a second closer. I'm gonna flip it around here. You guys can see this is the back and this is the front. So our spool will stay here and it will go straight into the filament detector. So you wanna go a little bit to the side to leave a little room for the spool and the filament to feed down into here. All right, for the next part, step 5, we already did this part with the reinforcement. So step 6 is connecting all of the cables, which there's not that many to connect, so this should be quite easy. So let's do this one here from this junction box. This cable here coming out into the stepper motor for the X axis. And right below that, we have this other little cable here that needs to be connected together. Make sure it's kind of out of the way because we do have this limit switch here. This is the Z-axis limit switch. And then we got 2 more motor cables, both on the Z-axis motors. So one here and then another one on the other side right here. And that is all of our wiring that we have to connect. So this printer is quite simple when it comes to the wiring. So after step 6, step 7 is aligning the X-axis to the base and then adjusting all the rollers, including the ones on the bed also. So we're pretty much done with assembly, and what they're talking about is checking all these rollers here on both sides, making sure they're adjusted. Mine are actually all adjusted just fine. So you do have an eccentric nut on each end here on the inside, and also on this, the eccentric nut is down here to adjust this. So if this is wobbling or too tight, then you want to adjust it. I already checked mine, everything looks good. Yeah, it's the same concept as the bed. You want them barely tight where they're holding on but not wobbling. So yeah guys, that's pretty much it for the assembly. You know, you want to kind of go over and check everything, maybe tighten all the bolts, check all the belts, things like that. Obviously that's important. So we can go ahead and put this mat on, which is magnetic, and it should clip in. There we go. So definitely love that they included the magnetic build surface because that's going to be very nice when it comes to peeling the models off after printing. So before we do anything else, let's go over the features real quick of the printer and look at it in a little bit more detail. All right, so this is what the Rock 3 looks like. It is quite large and especially tall with that spool holder all the way at the top. It is quite tall. So it does have a pretty large footprint. This is a large table. But let's go ahead and start here on the top so we can see the spool holder here. So the spool will sit on here and the filament will feed down through the filament detector and then down into the extruder here. The filament detector looks like a nice quality one. It's metal, so we're using just normal channels here. We do have some protection on the edges so they're not sharp. That's nice. So looking at it from the back now, we can see we have the dual leads and they are supported on the top with bearings on each side, and all these brackets are metal, so very nice quality there. Now again, they're not tethered together with a belt, which I wish they were, so you will have to make sure you start it off horizon level is equal every time. So going down here, we can see that everything is metal, all these brackets on both sides, couplers with motors. I definitely like all the extra reinforcements everywhere. That helps the gantry be very solid and not so shaky on top. Here's what the hot end assembly looks like from the back here. Our Y rails, which are far apart, gives us lots of stability. The Y-axis is stop switch. The motor here with the belt, and my belt is actually quite tight. You can almost play music on this thing. 4 bolts here that you loosen, and you can move the motor back and forth to loosen or tighten the belt. And so while we're back here, let's go ahead and look at the bed. So we got the build platform with the magnetic sticker, the plug here, and it is reinforced and strain relieved. The bed itself is aluminum, and a huge plus, if you guys can see there, we have insulation underneath the bed. So this is a heated bed obviously, and because of the insulation, it should heat up reasonably quick even for its size. We got pretty large adjustable knobs on all 4 corners, and it looks like high quality springs there, you can see, for the compression. Looking at the back of the printer, we got our on and off switch here. It's fused, and this is where we're going to plug in the power source. Printed onto the metal information about the printer, the print volume, and some certifications there. So we are sitting on nice rubber feet on the bottom. There's 4 of them, and you guys can see how the printer has a pretty low profile, so it's a quite attractive looking printer. So looking at it from the front again, here we can see the junction box that we installed where we plugged in the X-axis and stop switch. So the cable is actually hard mounted already. for the hot end that has everything, including the extruder assembly with the motor and obviously the hot end itself like we saw earlier. Now back over here on this side, we can see there's a long bolt here, and this is an adjustment for the switch down here. So, you know, going down more will stop it earlier. So this is our end stop switch for the Z-axis. So it's probably a good idea to run it down by hand and see when it clicks and how close it is to the bed. But we're going to do all that in a second before we power it on. So we can see this is our X-axis motor pulley inside that runs the belt for the hot end, an adjuster on this end to tighten and loosen it by releasing these two bolts here. So you guys can see the rails here on the bottom, pretty clean overall. Going to the front, on the left side we can see we have our touchscreen LCD, and it's quite large, 3.5 inch, good size. Let's go ahead and see if we can peel this protector off. It is coming off nicely, looks like. Well, maybe not. Alright, we got the logo here, the model, Rock 3. This is where we're going to insert our SD card, full size, and the USB connection. To the right, we have a pretty clean side with some venting. And to the left, same thing also. So yeah, overall, really nice printer. Seems to be built well, and it was quite easy to assemble. And definitely quite large. So make sure you have the room for this kind of size. Alright, so I got the printer plugged in, but before we power it on, let's go ahead and check, make sure that our nozzle is high enough. And also we want to compress our springs on the bed about halfway. That way we can go up and down from there a little easier. So I'm just going to turn both lead screws together so it lowers itself. And we're going to go all the way down to that switch over there. So once it clicks, which it's on it right now, we can check and see how far we are. So yeah, we got a pretty good gap here between the nozzle and the bed. Now because the motors on the Z-axis are not tethered, we need to level out this X plane here with the same dimension from here to the base. So whatever you use to measure, maybe a ruler or anything else that's like a prop or something. So I'm going to use this little remote here. So I'm just going to adjust this the same on each side. So you want to get this as close as possible. That way you got a really level horizon with the base. You don't want to measure to the bed because the bed is adjustable, so it could be wrong right now. But because the base is always the same, we're going to measure to the base. So now that we're pretty close, it should be good right there. So I'm going to go ahead and power it on. And it powers on. We can see the logo. Alright, and it's booted. And also guys, maybe you noticed, we can see that there's a little LED there, and it looks like a multicolor changing LED. So the first thing I like to do is home it. So we're going to click on menu and then home for all of them. Make sure everything works. Alright, so it looks like our X and Y are moving. So it looks like everything's working. And now the Z. So we do need to preheat. I'm going to click on the nozzle. So that was a hot button. Once you click on it, it just starts preheating. If we click on the bed. Okay, you can actually toggle here in the corner between the two. So the bed is going to 50 and the nozzle is going to 185. So they're both preheating. So the bed is taking a little while. So it appears that this printer doesn't have a bed leveling assistant. Looks like we're going to have to do it manually here, which is fine because we're just going to go to home and then home it like we did. So after it's homed, we're going to click the stop X here, which will disable the motors, I guess. So now we can move it around. And so for the next part, you're going to need some kind of paper. So I'm just using this read me first piece of paper that came with the printer. So we are still preheating. I'm going to wait till it heats up a little more because it is quite large. And once it's preheated, we're going to start manually leveling the bed. So you're going to be very careful of not to push this down and just kind of move it around by hand to each corner. So this is all going to be completely manual. So we're going to start from one corner here and then adjust it. So once it starts grabbing between the paper and the nozzle, and then we're going to go to the next corner. So a pretty simple procedure and just completely all manual, which is okay. To be honest, it's not that big of a deal. Usually manually leveling the bed like this is the best way to go anyways compared to any kind of automatic level. And so we're just going to go from corner to corner, back and forth, and keep leveling it all around the four corners until we get them really close. You want to go to the middle after that and check the middle. So if it's too loose, what you can do is you can move each knob exactly the same amount to go up or down. So I'm a little high, so I need to go up just a little bit. So I'm going to just turn each knob about a quarter on each side to go up, and that's pretty good right there. So we can go ahead and check everything else. It looks like I do have a bit of a dip on this bed, but it's not too bad overall. But still, there's definitely a little bit of a dip there. So, but you know, with this kind of large size bed, there are going to be, you know, some compromises here and there. Not everything is going to be perfect, obviously. So we'll see how that translates into the print. So let's go ahead and start with this black PLA here. Go through our filament detector, and by the way, the filament detector does have a little light that glows here. And then we're going to go down to the extruder. So to release it, or the gear, we're just going to pull on this here. So we're going to pull it and then push it down, and this is the tension on how hard it pushes on this arm here. So it feels pretty good, so I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And we can see there's a little blob that's coming out there. So let's go ahead and grab the SD card that was included and insert it here into the machine. And it does look like it goes upside down. So let's see if there's anything on the card itself. So we can see we're preheated the nozzle, the bed. Let's click on print here, and that's going to read the card. And sure enough, we do have some kind of folders here, G-code. Okay, so we do have quite a few prints. I don't think I'm going to print them all, but we'll try here a couple of them. Let's see what this pyramid's all about. All right, so the printer started, and it appears that we're pretty good off the bed, I think. Kind of hard to tell at this point, but it is all sticking. Okay, so it looks like it's a pretty large print, but it does appear that, yeah, it's sticking really good. So we looks like got it just right. So I don't know if I want to use up this filament, because this is my testing filament on this kind of prints, because this looks pretty large. Not sure exactly what this is going to be and how long it's going to take. So now that I know that everything's fine, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the print and change it to another filament. And then I'll restart this pyramid print. I'll click on stop, confirm. So it does go up and go to the side, so that's good to see. All right, so I'm restarting the same print with white filament this time. So we should be able to see it, at least on the first layer, a lot better. So yeah, it's going down really nice. So far, everything looks really good and seems to work. So as it's printing, let's see what kind of options we got here. So we got the file name on the top, pause, stop, the progress bar, the X and Y positions, the temperature on the hot end, and then the bed on this side, the Z-axis height, which is at 0.36 right now, and the time passed since we started, which is almost 4 minutes. So here we have hot buttons for adjusting the temperature, and it's going to toggle between the bed and the hot end, which is, interestingly enough, it's only at 185. I think I might want to bump that up a bit. Let's just go to 200, that's normal. Here we have percentage, so we can adjust the speed or the flow by toggling it here. So we also have a baby step, which lets us do the offset on the nozzle. So when you first start printing, you can go a little up or a little down straight from the panel here. So that's a really good option. I'm glad they included that. That could be very useful. And over here we have more. We have fan controls and also the extruder control. Pretty good options here, and also a very good layout. Also guys, before I forget, the printer is actually very quiet. So it definitely has silent steppers, because the only thing I can hear is some fan noise. But I'm going to bring my mic in and let you guys hear it. So yeah, very quiet, no stepper sound at all. Some fan noise, and it's not very loud either, so that's definitely a plus for this thing. Choosing the pyramid was probably not the best thing, because it is a very long print. It's been 5 hours and it's only 22 minutes done. But the good part is it looks like it's printing really nice. It appears to be quite a complicated kind of print. Yeah, I don't see any kind of stringing or anything funny, so that's a good sign there. So probably this was not the best print to start with, but we're just gonna go ahead and wait and see what turns out of this thing. Alright guys, so the pyramid is done, and it actually took a very long time. It looks like there's a little blob here on the top or something. I think it was like 14 hours or more, so yeah, this was a long print. So let's check out this flexible build plate here. So we should be able to pop it off quite easily. And sure enough, it does. Very simple. And again, this is really cool to have this large flexible build material here. So it looks like this is a pyramid. It's kind of like, I guess, a lot of little pyramids inside. So looking at it, it's white, kind of hard to tell, but I can see a little bit of layering, to be honest. So it doesn't look all that great. It's not bad by any means, but not great either. Let's see if this raft or whatever this is. pulls off. Okay, not that easy, so I'm just gonna leave it on. Yeah, so I don't know if this was worth it to print, but it was one of the models included. And I feel like they should include models that are more simple, that make more sense. But I'm gonna go ahead and try another one and see how it'll turn out. But I think I wanna go ahead and preheat it and change the filament to another color. I guess let's try the round vase. Hopefully that'll be a little quicker. So I put in some, I guess, light pink or pink filament. Hopefully this print won't take forever like the last one. But yeah, the level seems to be perfect again. So it's starting off nicely. So let's see how this print turns out. Alright, so the vase finished and it only took about an hour and a half or so, maybe 2. So let's go ahead and pop it off. So as you guys can see, prints come off so easy over here. So this one also has a raft. And right away, it definitely doesn't look as good as I would want it. And I think it's just inconsistencies in the color or something, because I could see the wall is pretty good, but there's discoloration. So this might be my filament. And again, the raft is stuck on it. So honestly, I think I'm wasting my time printing these prints off of the SD card. And a lot of times those pre-sliced models that come with printers are not that good. So I think I'm going to go ahead and move to slicing my own. And I'm going to start with a calibration cube and a benchy. And we're going to print it in silky black PLA so we can see really good all of the layer lines and the print quality itself. So, alright, so the calibration cube has started. And the cube will show us really good of how this printer performs and how the layers go down. So I'm going to go ahead and print both the cube and the benchy, and then we'll take a closer look. Alright, so the cube and the benchy are printed out, and they both seem to turn out pretty good. Let's go ahead and look at the cube. So this is the x-axis, pretty nice. The y-axis, which actually looks a little better than the x. So look at the x here, and then the y. Pretty nice, considering how large the bed is. And then we have the X wall and the Y wall, and you guys can see there quite a bit of a difference. So the Y is looking pretty good. X has a little bit of those vibrations in them. And because the extruder and the hot end is all one assembly, it is quite heavy, so that might have something to do with it. Nut bottom's pretty nice. Looks like it's a little hazy from, I guess, the white from the bed. And the top looks pretty good too. It might be a little bit of over extrusion, but let's go ahead and grab these calipers. Alright, so we're zeroed out. Let's go ahead and try the X first here. So we got 20.2. So yeah, it's a little bit over. Let's try the Y. Okay, and the Y is a little bit under. That's not perfect, but I guess not too bad overall. Let's check the X again. So yeah, and the Z is pretty much right on the money. So yeah, overall turned out pretty good. Not perfect, but you know, quite acceptable, and finish on the walls looks pretty good. So let's take a look at the benchy here. It's still stuck to the bed. Let's see if I can just rip it off. Alright, and as you guys saw, that comes off really easy. And this is what the bottom looks like. Pretty good. So the benchy turned out pretty well overall. You guys can see the walls there. Nice reflection. So there's a little bit of layering. It's not terrible, but it is there. You can really see it here on this black filament. And by the way, all the settings were 0.2 millimeter layer height with 50 millimeter speed, 200 on the nozzle, and 50 on the bed. And the retraction was set at 5 millimeters. So that probably needs to be bumped up to about 6.5 to 7, looks like, because we do have some stringy. But other than that, if we look at all the walls, the cooling is good. All the overhangs are pretty good. So overall, pretty good benchy, but you know, definitely not perfect. There's some, I guess, lines in it. The box here has a little slit there. Now there is a little bit of ringing on the Y, if you guys can see that. And for some reason on the cube, it didn't show up, now that I could see there. But on the benchy here on the back, you can see there's a little bit of ringing there. So it's not severe, but it is there. It's kind of interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and print more things, maybe some larger items too. And so far the printer's doing well, everything is working, and there seems to be no issues whatsoever. So once I print out all the prints, we're going to take a closer look at all of them and talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of the printer. All right, so these are all the prints that we printed, and overall the printer did very well. None of the prints failed, they all sticked, so there's no issues there. So let's go ahead and start with this little frog here, and as we can see, it looks pretty good overall. There is like a vibration sort of on him. You guys maybe can see it's like a pattern. He's not as silky smooth as he could be, but still very nice. And here underneath his chin, it's nice and smooth, so the cooling is great. So this frog is a little hard to print because it's, you know, quite detailed, but the printer did pretty good job here with the frog. I would say pretty average as far as the print quality. Here we have a bolt, or I think it's officially called a screw. But yeah, we can see it turned out really good also. As long as you're not like looking for the absolute like perfection, and you guys can see this printer does very well with these prints. And here I forgot to take off one of the layers from the older print and got fused into here, but yeah, overall really solid, and the overhangs are nice, and just the layers are going down really good. Now another thing I like to test on every printer is the accuracy of how the layers go down, and this bearing here kind of shows the tolerances if there are good ones on the printer, and unfortunately on this printer the whole bearing here fused together and it won't spin. It is over extruding just a bit. I think it's the top layer, if you guys can see maybe. It's still fused together, and looking at the side of it, kind of see the layering in it. It seems like it's over extruding at times or something like that. So now that doesn't mean that the printer can't print, you know, more interesting things like this, where, you know, you do need accuracy also with all these little feet. And this octopus turned out really well, except for the retraction. I think I accidentally sliced this thing with the 5mm retraction, which is not enough for this printer. It needs to be somewhere around 7 or so, and he is a bit stringy here and there and blobby, but if we look at just the print quality itself, it's not too bad. It's definitely about average. And one of the important things about this print is because there's so many legs and they're all, you know, printed separately, the bed was able to hold them all and, you know, finish the print and connect all the links. So, and here on his head we can kind of see the more smoother areas, so it didn't turn out too bad either there. So overall, I would say it's an average print. So I also printed another calibration cube, and this one is in TPU. Now this TPU that I used is really low quality, and I think that might have something to do with this finish. But overall, it was still able to print TPU because we do have a direct drive extruder. It seemed to do pretty well with, you know, obviously slowing the speed down. And you guys can see here that it turned out pretty well. And this is TPU. I'm not sure if I guess I can't really bend this too much. It's like a cube, but it does squish somewhat. And for the last two prints, I like to print the astronaut and the spaceship. So let's take a look at the astronaut. So in the astronaut here, you can really see how the layers are sitting because, you know, mostly he's smooth everywhere. And our cooling is actually excellent because under his fingers here, most of the time, this is droopy. So the printer did very well with cooling. And also with the astronaut is we have very small area to grab to on the build plate. So again, the flexible build plate did an excellent job with holding the prints, and then popping off was easy on every single one. So, but yeah, if we look at a little closer here, we can see that there are layering somewhat, especially here you can see. It's not bad, but they are there. So overall the print looks great, but if you look at it really close, you can start to see some of the layering here and there. Now the discoloration you see here, that's just looks like filament discoloration. But so yeah, overall again average. And so for the last print we have this spaceship, and this is in spiralized mode. So we have a few layers on the bottom, and then it's all one layer to the top around. And to my surprise, the printer did actually a very good job here. Definitely above average for this spiralized mode. And you guys can kind of see the reflections, they're pretty good. So there is a slight vibration, but it's not severe. So great walls, overall great uniformity looks like. Here we have the G logo and just a window, and you can see maybe the ringing, I guess, somewhat on the window there. So there is a little bit of ghosting or whatever you would call that. But as we go to the top, we can see things get really good and smooth. And this part here usually is extremely smooth, and you guys can see it's pretty good, but there are a little bit of layering lines. And as we go up, we can see this part turned out really good. There is one strong layer line right here, but overall this finished, and it is very thin, and as it goes up, usually it melts up here, and this printer did very well because it only melted at the very tip, and it also was able to do the ball on the top with no issues. So yeah, spaceship looks great overall. I think, you know, the printer does very well as what it is. If you were getting started with printing, you probably won't be disappointed. But I still feel like tethering the dual Z rods in the back would have been a smart choice for that consistency. Because I have a feeling some of these layer lines that are popping up is because of some inconsistencies. As it's going up, it's kind of going up, you know, not exactly the right way maybe, or something like that. But it also could be the extruder. So as always, I box the printers and I use them as they are without adjusting anything, so we can really see how the printers come straight from the factory. Now there are a few negative things that I found on this printer, and one of them was the heated bed. The platform dips in the middle quite a bit, and when I say quite a bit, it's about 1/2 millimeter or so. I have a pretty nice dip there, so that can be straightened out by taking it apart and bending it the other way and getting it close. But it would have been nice to see it coming straight out of the factory, so that was a little bit of an issue. But because we have the baby steps in the controller there, I was able to go down to where I needed to start the print, and then after the first layer was set, you know, everything is fine after that. The other negative is it looks like we are over extruding a little because we weren't able to turn this bearing, so the printer naturally over extrudes a bit, which is a little bit of a negative for precision printing, but a positive for stronger prints. And all these prints feel very strong, and that shows it also in this spaceship because it is over extruding by a tiny bit. It's able to bond a little better. Other than that, the printer did very well. It never failed. It never had any issues printing. There are a lot of good features on this printer, like the filament detector. The touchscreen display is nice and responsive, and you do have auto resume, so if you lose power, you can resume the print. There is a pretty interesting looking LED light under there. It's pretty useless overall, but it does give it a little interesting vibe, and it is an RGB, so it keeps changing color. The heated bed is insulated on the bottom, so that's great. It doesn't take long for it to heat up. The full-size SD card is just much nicer to use. All the reinforcements that they did on the frame here between the gantry and the base, plus this being a direct drive, which everything is together on the hot end, and being able to print things like TPU without any issues. And one of the more nicer things about this printer is the quiet stepper drivers, and you can't hear the steppers at all, only fan sounds, so that's a pretty big plus if you're around the printer a lot. It is very nice for it to be that quiet. And I think the biggest thing about this thing is it is quite large, of a build volume of 320 by 320 by 400. And if you're quite new to 3D printing, you might find this pretty intriguing because you do get a lot of printer, and also the assembly of this thing is very simple, so that would not require any kind of knowledge of knowing how to build it all together. But if you've been around 3D printing for a while, this printer might not impress you too much, but I think with some tweaks and modifications, it can be a good printer for the more experienced user. Alright guys, well hopefully you enjoyed this video of the MINGDA Rock 3. If you are interested in this thing, I'm going to have some links in the description, so check that out. And if you enjoyed this video, then hit that like button. And if you are interested in this kind of content, I have a pretty long playlist of 3D printers I have reviewed already, so check that out. And there will be more 3D printing reviews coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. Alright, so thanks for watching this video, and as always, I'll see you on the next one. Peace.